You're sitting across from someone you really like. The conversation is good. The eye contact feels easy. And then they say it, casually, almost like it's nothing. Yeah, I haven't been in a relationship in over 2 years. And technically that's true, but what they don't say is that they've been in 3 situationships since then. That they dated someone for 8 months without ever calling it official. That their ex still texts them late at night and sometimes they text back. They didn't lie to you, but they didn't tell you the whole truth either. And here's the thing. You've probably done this too. We all have. We craft these technically accurate statements that protect us from being fully seen. We tell the truth, but we curate which truths we share. And when it comes to exes, this habit shows up everywhere. This isn't about being manipulative. It's about survival. Your brain has learned that full transparency can feel like handing someone a loaded weapon. So it protects you, not by lying, but by carefully managing what gets said out loud. Let me be clear. You are not broken for doing this. This behavior makes complete sense. Your nervous system is doing exactly what it was trained to do, keep you safe in a world where vulnerability has consequences. So let's talk about why this happens. Not to judge it, but to understand it. Because once you see the psychology underneath, the behavior stops feeling like a flaw. It starts feeling human. The first reason this happens is emotional self-preservation. When you've been hurt before, your brain builds walls that don't look like walls. They look like selective honesty. You tell someone you're over your ex because in many ways you are. You don't cry anymore. You don't check their location. You don't replay the breakup in your mind every night. So when you say, "I'm over it," you mean it. But what you leave out is that you still feel something when you see their name pop up, that you avoid certain restaurants because they remind you of them, that you haven't fully processed what went wrong, so part of you is still holding on. Not to them, but to the version of yourself that existed in that relationship. Your brain learned early that admitting you're not completely healed makes you seem damaged. Unready, too much. So it edits the story, not to deceive, but to protect your image, to protect your chances, to protect the fragile new thing you're trying to build with someone else. Think about it like this. You're not hiding the truth, you're managing the narrative, and your brain sees that as intelligent, not dishonest. The second reason is attachment history. If you grew up in an environment where your emotions were dismissed, minimized, or punished, your brain learned that sharing the full story invites rejection. So now, as an adult, you instinctively withhold details, not out of malice, but out of conditioning. You might say, "We ended on good terms," because that's easier than explaining that you still feel guilty, that you wonder if you were the problem, that you're terrified the same patterns will show up again. In psychology, this is called avoidant attachment. It's not about being cold. It's about being trained to handle your emotions alone. So when someone asks about your past, your brain offers them the sanitized version, the one that won't scare them off, the one that keeps you in control. But here's the part nobody tells you. This behavior isn't just about protecting yourself from others, it's about protecting yourself from yourself. Because if you say out loud that you're still healing, that means you have to admit it's real. And admitting it's real means you have to feel it. And feeling it means losing the composure you've worked so hard to maintain. So you tell the truth, just not all of it. The third reason is identity protection. When you talk about your ex, you're not just talking about them, you're talking about a version of yourself you're no longer sure you want to be associated with. Maybe that relationship made you feel small. Maybe you compromised too much. Maybe you stayed longer than you should have, and now, looking back, you're embarrassed by how much you tolerated. So when you say, "It just didn't work out," what you're really doing is protecting the person you are now from being judged for the person you were then. This is why people often downplay how serious a past relationship was, not because they're lying, but because acknowledging how deeply they were in it means acknowledging how much they've changed since. And change feels vulnerable. It implies you didn't have it all figured out, that you made mistakes, that you were different. And in a new relationship, especially early on, you want to seem consistent, stable, like you've always been this self-aware, emotionally intelligent version of yourself. Admitting the full truth about your ex threatens that image, so your brain edits again. It highlights the parts that make you look good and quietly omits the rest. And this is where it gets interesting, Because this behavior doesn't just show up in dating, it shows up everywhere. You do it when someone asks how you're doing and you say fine even though you're barely holding it together. You do it when a friend asks about your job and you say, it's good even though you're burnt out and looking for an exit. You do it when your family asks about your life and you give them the version that won't worry them. We are constantly telling truths that hide realities, not because we're dishonest people, but because full transparency feels risky, and your brain, above all else, wants to keep you safe. The fourth reason is emotional regulation. Talking about your ex in detail requires you to revisit emotions you've worked hard to file away, and your nervous system knows that once you start talking about it, those feelings might flood back. So instead, you give the condensed version, the one that doesn't require you to cry, the one that doesn't make your chest tighten, the one that lets you stay composed. This is your brain's way of protecting your bandwidth, because you're already managing so much, your job, your friendships, your own internal struggles. Adding the emotional weight of rehashing your past on top of that feels like too much. So you tell the truth, you just tell the least activating version of it. And here's what's important to understand. This isn't avoidance in the toxic sense. This is self-preservation in the survival sense. Your brain isn't being manipulative, it's being protective. But over time, this habit creates a gap between what people think they know about you and what's actually going on inside. And that gap can feel lonely, because you're surrounded by people who care about you, but none of them know the whole story. Not because you won't tell them, but because you've learned that telling them costs too much. The fifth reason this happens is that you've internalized the idea that your past makes you less desirable. Somewhere along the way, you absorb the message that baggage is bad, that being over it is the only acceptable state, that admitting you're still processing something from 2 years ago makes you look stuck. So when someone new comes into your life, you instinctively downplay how much your past still affects you. You say, I'm in a good place now, because you are in some ways. But what you don't say is that you're still learning how to trust again, that you're still figuring out what you want, that some days you're not sure you even believe in relationships anymore. You don't say that because it sounds heavy. And you've been told, implicitly or explicitly, that nobody wants to date someone who's still working through things. But here's the truth. Everyone is still working through things. The difference is just how honest they're willing to be about it. And the reason you're not fully honest isn't because you're trying to deceive anyone. It's because you've learned that vulnerability is a gamble. And right now, you're not sure you can afford to lose. So you tell the truth. You just tell the version that keeps you safe, the version that doesn't expose how much you're still figuring out, the version that makes you seem ready, even when you're not entirely sure you are. And that's okay, because being human means living in contradiction. It means being mostly over something while still carrying pieces of it. It means telling the truth while also protecting yourself from the weight of the whole truth. This behavior doesn't make you dishonest. It makes you someone who's trying to move forward while still healing. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're not broken. You're not manipulative. You're not damaged. You're just someone who learned that the full story isn't always safe to share. And until you find someone who makes it feel safe, your brain will keep protecting you the only way it knows how, by telling the truth, just not all of it.